Hello and welcome to part 5 of the series Neurodivergence and Lightworkers or Starseeds. So in the previous series we've talked more in depth on what neurodivergence is and what kind of patterns show up in the lives of people who are neurodivergent. And I went through a whole comparison of the different traits that I see as similarities between the people who are neurodivergent and lightworkers or starseeds. And I was just noticing this trend. There can be some crossover. So bringing to light awareness. If you show traits that are strongly exhibited by both, and you want more depth of explanation, or maybe some ideas about how to improve your life, to make it more manageable, to actually be able to achieve some goals. So, for example, what I talked about last time was that if you are struggling with autistic traits or ADHD, then what you really need is help in being able to make your life easier. So, for example, organization tools for ADHD, bringing consequences closer into the future, or closer into the now versus being extended out towards the future, and building a framework and scaffolding around yourself. And when you are clear about exactly what the issue that you're struggling with is, then you're able to address that. However, when you have some kind of vague explanation for what's going on in your life, then that can prevent you from being able to move forward and make positive change in your life. And this has been a really interesting process for me as I do this series and as I learn more about this process and recognize these traits within myself. The missing piece that I haven't really talked about is autistic burnout, autistic meltdowns, or they can exhibit as shutdowns, like a meltdown being more observable externally, otherwise a shutdown is kind of like a shutdown internally, so it's more felt and less seen. And a shutdown could be something that shows up when someone is trying to mask. They're not trying to avoid having their life implode by having this meltdown and then losing the job or losing connections with family members and those kind of things. So we've got the burnout, meltdowns or shutdowns. Another thing that shows up is struggles with identity. And the last point is the skill regression. So as you develop awareness of what autism is, what ADHD entails, these kind of neurodivergent traits, and you start to recognize them within yourself, and you start to build this model, an explanation of why you had this certain life experience. And it could have been challenging, it could have been a struggle. It might have been very obvious to you and very obvious to the people around you, but you also might have just blended in. Because this can be something where the difference is primarily felt internally. So you have this internal experience. It can be quite different from other people. And if there's no understanding or awareness, conscious awareness of this difference and what's happening, what can happen is that you start playing this game of kind of playing this character of your life, fitting yourself into this mold. And then this can be exhausting, require a lot of energy, and really prevent you from having the kind of outcomes that you really want. So there are some people who are able to get diagnosed young and get the help they need. They will still have struggles. But then for the people who don't get recognized, don't get diagnosed, which is fairly common, if their symptoms aren't typical, and don't get the help they need, they could have been living their whole life where they are playing this character, they are fitting in, and could be very high achieving in the sense that the effort and the work that they do to fit in is really huge amount of effort, and they're very skilled at it, and they develop this high level of proficiency at fitting in.
So whatever symptoms or behaviors or patterns that they have that are showing up are hidden. And this can take a toll. So to be a little bit more specific, with ADHD, we're talking about an issue with attention, being able to focus, and an issue with impulsivity. So those were the two main categories that showed up. So you can have initial focus, the focus fades over time. In contrast with autism, where you need time to ramp up that focus. So with like someone who has those autistic traits, they don't like being disturbed because they're ramping up their focus when they have their focus locked into a task, and that disruption really disrupts that focus, and they feel like they have to start over again, like their focus and the process is ruined. And then the other aspect with ADHD is the impulsivity. So that can be a lack of filter of what you say. And we talked about like financial decisions, relationship decisions, driving issues, and also like they can be very negative effects of that. With the autistic behaviors, and we went through a lot of what was listed in the DSM-5, and that was based on Orion Kelly's video that I linked in that live stream. We are talking a lot about social deficits, and it really focused on that. So there was that criteria that described somewhat vaguely these kind of variations. And I liked a video that someone did where they talked about, on the autistic spectrum, whether you're autistic or not, it is a line in the sand. The whole idea or concept of autism is somewhat imaginary in the sense that it's a concept. And we use this term, autism, to describe people whose brains are somewhat on the periphery of the normal or the more normal spectrum. So within every population there is variation, and oftentimes we see this variation show up within a distribution where most people are centered around the middle, and then you've got extremes at either end. And of course with autism what you have these various different areas, and of course they can be social, language, issues with abstracting, sensory issues, and there can be the physical component where it's like that difficulty with orienting yourself in space and not being clumsy. So having accidents and being accident prone. So there's like those different aspects of it, and we describe it together as autism. So the concept of it, like, it's not simple, because you can say, do you have this cold? Like, do you have a cold? That's not really a good example, but for example, you can do a blood test. We'll stick with like a blood test. What type of blood do you have? And you have like A blood, B blood, O blood, AB blood. So it's easy and clear to define what that is. With autism, what we're really saying is that we have a portion of the population that they are basically wired differently. So their brain is wired differently, their perception is different, And this is going to present challenges in their life. And the main thing that showed up with the DSM-5 is that these issues are going to present significant challenges. So that could be the difference between being diagnosed as autism or not. And of course, you could try to get diagnosed and they can say, no, you're not autistic because you're not demonstrating the characteristics that an autistic child would have. Because the DSM-5, of course, a lot of the diagnostic criteria is geared towards children and not adults. And of course, if you're an adult, you've probably developed considerable coping and masking skills. So just to fit into society, you have developed these like tricks and techniques to be able to fit in enough and not reveal your true self. And the biggest issue with that is that, first of all, it can be unconscious or subconscious, so you're not even aware that you're doing this. And second of all, you're not realizing the difference in your experience and other people's experience. If you're able to fit in enough, or your environment is in a way that these issues are not going to be loud in how they present themselves, or the people around you don't have enough awareness to pick up on it, you can come across as weird and awkward and like not well socially integrated, because like there are these differences in the way you are perceiving other people in the world around you and situations. And it's very much like, you have the example where two people are experiencing the same situation, and they go away and they describe something different. Well, this difference is really exacerbated. So you're living your life, you're fitting in, and this can be very much, I'm talking about like the link between achievement and masking, because if you're successful enough at masking, this can be a kind of achievement. Because if you mask well, you can get positive reinforcement from that, and you continue to do that and really base your identity around this. And that can lead to a lot of people-pleasing, lack of personal boundaries, and also lack of your own sense of identity. Because you get positive reinforcement for playing this character, for really putting on this show, really working hard to fit other people's expectations. And as children, we naturally do this. As you grow and you have more and more demands placed on you, like as you become an adult, and the demands on you come to the point, these stressors of paying your bills, fitting in to your workplace, being able to present as socially acceptable, for example, in a job interview, it may be struggling with emotional regulation, and trying to not let other people see who you really are because you could lose your job, or maybe if you have a relationship, or whatever social circles you have, trying to present in a way where you're not going to be rejected by the people around you. You're not going to lose any social support structure. When you are conforming to this degree, first of all, it can take a lot of effort. And you can be putting so much effort in that it's like wearing you out, and you're not able to put that same effort into other areas in your life. So the simple tasks can be a lot more difficult. But you're not really exercising your own autonomy and your own identity, and you're constantly sacrificing a sense of who you are and expressing your true self for the sake of fitting in, for the sake of being a cohesive part of the whole. And the more you do this, the more disingenuous you feel within yourself, and the more it's almost like developing this fractured self. Because you are playing this role, and you can get really involved and immersed in the role that you're playing. This kind of character, this person who is externally acceptable, and you can become immersed in that. And what can happen is, if you have this fractured self and you're not able to, you have to try so hard to fit in that you're not even conscious of not being connected to a true self. And of course, if you're people pleasing and not having good boundaries, you're not connected to a true self, to who you truly are. Because there's no one to connect to. All you're relying on other people to tell you what to do, to inform you of what to say. So there's the struggle there. Without that connection to your true self, without being able to express your true self, that leads to a kind of loneliness in a crowd. You have this isolation where you're not able to truly connect with people. So that wears on you over time. So if you have anxiety about being able to, so it looks like it might have cut out there, so I'm going to just say that again. So if you have anxiety about social situations and you're worried about, I don't want to impulsively blurt something out that's inappropriate because I lack that kind of filter. I don't want to feel like the person feels like I'm rude because I'm not paying attention. I don't want to make a social mishap because I'm really not sure what the social rules are here, and I don't have a script for this situation. Let's say if you're autistic and you're not cueing in to those social cues, but you have a situation set up for yourself, for example, at work, where you know what's expected of you. You're able to play that role, and it's not stressful because you've been consistently doing it and you haven't gotten fired, so you have some kind of stability there. But you go into a new situation and it's stressful because you don't know what the rules are. So let's say you have anxiety from performing your role well enough. Now, this anxiety is no joke, because being able to perform this role can affect your survival. Right? If it affects your job, if it affects your social relationships, being able to have social relationships provides a network of connection and support. Connection and support to deal with challenging or difficult situations in your life, to get connections, to be able to network to get a job, to be able to get the support you need, for example, when you're sick or you have a health issue. So these kind of things, like it can come down fundamentally to what feels like a life and death issue. So even if it's not a life or death issue in the moment, at the core of it, it's this struggle for survival. And it's this constant struggle for survival to be able to just live. And if you struggle with being exhausted by constantly having to play this role, you might struggle with being able to even just do all the things that you need to do to live, like taking care of your laundry and cooking and cleaning, as well as having a job. And of course, if you get that far and then your mental health is, you're struggling with your mental health because you don't have any social relationships because you're so immersed in trying to take care of everything else, and there's this anxiety about that, then you have that aspect to take care of. Then that can cause stress, trying to make friends, trying to fit in there. So it's really like this living in this survival state. Now, of course, living in this survival state, exerting a lot of effort, that can lead to burnout. And what's really insidious about this is that you think like, you know what, I'm doing what other people are doing and I'm exhausted but I need to keep pushing myself. I need to keep doing more because you're in a survival state. You get more exhausted and, you know, like, oh, you need to like exercise and eat healthy to manage depression, because maybe someone says you're depressed, because that might be like an obvious external sign. Someone can say, oh, you're depressed, you need to manage that. So I got diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety. And that is a common thing that can happen, is that you get diagnosed with these other more obvious issues. And really the root cause of it isn't brought to light. And of course that's really confusing, like, but why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? I don't understand, right? And this is the struggle that I faced, because I wanted to know, like, why am I depressed? And there was no answer. I couldn't find any answer, and no one could help me with that. And that was really, really frustrating, because, you know, I never want to be in that state again. You can have these periods of burnout from constantly exerting yourself to try to fit in, that are like really deep and really intense, take a long time to recover from. And it's like, but I should be able to do more. Like, why is so little causing like such an extreme reaction in me? And it's like this lack of awareness of realizing, oh, I'm not realizing how stressful the factors and everything that's happening in my life is for me. And of course this burnout can accumulate. This stress accumulates over time. And so you can get into this cycle where you try to rest a little bit and go back at it, and then you just end up more burnt out than before. It's this struggle understanding, like, what are the cues in my body so I can become aware of where do I need to prioritize my energy and my focus and say no. So, of course, you have to put in all this extra effort to build connections and do what you need to do in an environment that is not suited for you. But of course, that takes so much energy, and then it can lead to burnout, and then that further impairs your ability. So you have to balance the need to fit in with your own need for rest, for your own self-expression, because the other aspect of it is if you're dealing with this impulsivity. So a lot of people with autism also have ADHD. I should say some people with autism also have ADHD. So if you have ADHD, then you've got this issue with impulsivity, and what you might need to do is constantly use this self-restraint, use your willpower to restrain that impulsivity. And that takes a lot of energy. So like we talked about in a previous live stream, I think it was the last one, how you have this this well or this bank of willpower, which fuels your ability for that self-restraint. And also, you know, another aspect of that is the masking. Like, how much willpower, how much energy do you have to play this social game? And the more energy you use up, once you get to the bottom, you have no more willpower left, no more self-restraint. And then if you are in a situation that requires you to have self-restraint, now you have a problem. Now you've got issues. Now you have something that can blow up and essentially like ruin your life. So I've had this cycle of burnout over and over and over and over again. And as we've gone through this series, I've started to see and realize like, oh, I see the pattern. And no, I don't just have to work harder and harder and harder and harder like I have been for so many years, and I'm going to get there. No, there's a reason why. There's a reason why I kept burning out. There's a reason why I was diagnosed with severe clinical depression and anxiety, so it got really, really bad. There's a reason why I struggled in specific ways with social dynamics and interactions. There are reasons why I flourished, or seemed to flourish in high school, and then completely crashed in college. And of course, a lot of people outside me did not see this struggle. So I've mentioned autistic burnout. And of course I say autistic burnout, but of course with ADHD, that can happen as well. So autism and ADHD are similar in certain ways that they have some shared exhibited traits and behaviors, but like the reasons why those traits show up are different. So the next thing I'll talk about are the meltdowns or shutdowns. So the meltdowns and shutdowns is something that I've learned about recently, and I've only seen them talked about in the context of autism. So I'm not sure how that plays out with ADHD, but it could be similar. So the meltdown is simply described as an overwhelm of, probably it could be like sensory input or stimulation. For some people it's primarily emotional overwhelm that triggers it. And it can look, for some people, something like a tantrum. So you have a child throwing a tantrum because they don't get what they want. Now, an autistic meltdown can look like a tantrum, but it's not just the person being selfish and thinking that if they just have this tantrum, then they can manipulate and pressure the person they're with into giving them what they want. So like this childlike behavior. A meltdown is when you have this overstimulation and it almost like short circuits the fuse or the wires in the brain. Kind of like an electrical fire. So you have this, its pressure is building, and then it just snaps. So completely lose the ability to self-regulate. So what you might have had coming up to this point is self-restraint. So there can be factors which are challenging, and you're just using that willpower and self-restraint to cope with it. But then it builds to a point where you can no longer cope with it, and it's kind of reached the boiling point. The videos that I've seen about meltdowns or shutdowns that I resonate the most with are the ones that I've seen that women made, where they're demonstrating like this gut-wrenching sobbing and crying, and one of them described like they hit the wall, but it was this like description or video of this person like in intense agony, and it's just like these gut-wrenching sobs. So as we've been doing this live stream series, I've been like, yeah, you know what, I have some of those traits, but I don't know if I would fall into the category of being autistic. Because, yeah, I don't know if I struggle enough in my life to fit that. Well, not last weekend, because I was still recovering, but the weekend before, we had a long weekend, and I was working from home, and a bunch of family shows up at our house. And I had no idea this was going to happen, so it's a surprise to me. Like, that's the first thing, like, oh, okay, so now I have to deal with this extra surprise. And of course, I try to just deal with it. And there's people loud and making noise, and I had some challenges. Like, I had to go to the grocery store, and when I asked for a box to put the groceries in, they said no, because I already had a bag to put groceries in. And this was extremely emotionally dysregulating for me. I was really, really upset about it. I felt like really embarrassed, like I did something wrong, and that I didn't notice the social cues, and I felt dumb that I didn't notice the social cues, where I should have known that, oh, of course I can't have the box because I already have a bag. And it didn't make sense to me at the time because, well, when I asked for a box before, they had no problem giving me a box. They were very generous with the boxes. But I didn't have a bag at that time. And so, like, there was this level of shame and embarrassment, and then also anger, because, like, why should I feel shame? Why should I feel embarrassed? And this could have been the sort of situation where, if my bank or well of willpower and ability to have self-restraint was higher, I would have been able to likely gloss over it and not have an issue. But because I was already drained from having self-restraint and trying to focus on work, while there's these kids running around and making noise all day, I had no self-restraint left. So fast forward another 2 days, people being loud, being in my space, there being disagreements, social situations where I'm not sure how to navigate it, and it's stressful. So there it was, the sensory aspect, which was overwhelming, the noise. And then there's the social aspect. These social situations where I feel uncomfortable, I'm not really sure how to navigate them, and I feel anxiety and I feel pressure to rise to the occasion. So it's very draining. And looking back that week, I also had a mountain bike accident and I hurt myself. So that had been draining that bank or energy storage of willpower throughout the week, because it was quite painful and I was really anxious about it becoming infected. It likely did. I put polysporin on it and put a band-aid on it and hope for the best. And it's gone from like black to like white and green, and now it's red, so it's definitely getting better. So there's these factors which drained my ability to self-regulate, my ability to focus, my ability to deal with daily life, so that executive function, daily life tasks. And 3 days after they showed up was when I snapped. I just couldn't deal with the people and the noise anymore. So I could feel myself becoming more and more upset and emotionally dysregulated, and I was just about to like... So there's people like around the house, and I'm about to like just break into tears and start crying and sobbing. And of course, looking back, oh my gosh, this has happened before. And I'm making the dots connecting the dots, making the connections and realizing there's a pattern. And it's more than just some kind of trauma response. Because maybe before I could have chalked it up to a trauma response. But here I can clearly see the factors that contributed to it. So going through it, and seeing other people watch you go through this. It's very stressful. Because looking back in the previous time, I lost my ability to talk to anyone. I couldn't engage with anyone. I was really, really upset. I was crying. And there's all these people around, they don't understand what's going on. Like, they're having a good time, they're happy, and I'm really upset. And so how do you transition from that to when you recover and now you're suddenly able to talk to people again? Especially like with kids. And there's the shame and embarrassment that you feel with that. And so I'm doing my best to try and hold it in, to not let people see, because I don't want to deal with the fallout from it. So I was like, I have to get out of here. I got in the car and I left. I was like so I'm extremely dysregulated, like driving, like racked with like sobs and just like this kind of, like, it's almost like it's like something horrible has just happened and you're dealing with this immense grief and sadness and pain. But the situation is that there's just been too many people, right? So the response is like way out of proportion to what is happening. And that's why like it's so confusing. It can be confusing for you, can be really confusing for the people around you. So, and at this point, like, it's hard to think straight. It's hard to gather thoughts. Like, thinking is foggy. It's difficult to put together tasks. Like, what do I need to take with me before I leave? It was really difficult to do that. I'm like, I need to get out of here, and I'm not sure. Come back maybe, or buy what I need, because I can't put it together in my mind what I need before I just lose it. And of course, like, you know, like, this is not this time where you want to be like vulnerable and be yourself if you're around people who aren't going to take it well, where you're just going to deal with more fallout from that later on. Like, it's just going to make your life more difficult. So yeah, sometimes you need like this mask. Sometimes you need the character, because people they're going to treat you worse if you do not have the character. They're going to treat you badly, and it's going to negatively impact your life. So, like, there's a reason that you have this character. There's a reason you have this protection mechanism. So I had a really hard time, like, just trying to plan and figure out what I'm going to do, because, like, I'm extremely emotionally dysregulated. I'm extremely upset, and it's like a fire's gone off in the brain. Like, it's just melted, and it's just like set the whole system haywire. Like, it's this extremely intense stress. So it's like a bomb has gone off, And it's just left all these like shattered pieces, and it's like this purging of the stress. Like all this stress has built up and now it's just being purged. And of course, like, along came this anxiety. Because of course, like, part of the willpower is like suppressing the effects of anxiety, right? But you don't have that, any of that. Like the tank is empty. There's nothing left there to self-regulate, to deal with anxiety. And that's probably why it's so awful, because like you're not, let's say for example, like during the day you're able to self-regulate better than maybe at night. Maybe at night, you know, more anxious thoughts can show up, more depressed thoughts can show up, and maybe the next day you're able to like, oh, like it's fine. Like maybe at midnight you're like a little bit anxious and you're ruminating on these things, and then maybe the next day is better. And I found, like, for me, I could not talk to my mom at night because she would bring up things that would really stress me and I wouldn't be able to sleep. But like the next day I could have handled it. It's just I didn't have the capacity to deal with that at nighttime. But like that might be why the autistic meltdown, and of course the shutdown, is when instead of releasing this stress and expressing it outwards, when in a meltdown it's just all just crumpled and turned inside, so you're imploding on the inside. So it's really nasty. Like all the goo and ick from this stress is just imploding inwards. Now you've got like this emotional dysregulation. It's just like releasing. You got to release all this stress and tension that's pent up. But you have no ability to mask it or to like regulate it because that self-control's gone. And just need a sec. So the bomb goes off. It implodes or explodes, and yeah, it just really sets like the whole system like on fire. So that once the energy is released, the fire goes out, and now you've got the devastation of like the burnt house. So just like extreme exhaustion, extreme fatigue, and this is something that I saw consistently for the accounts of like the burnout or meltdown that I saw, is like this extreme fatigue afterwards, which is like, it's awful because like trying to deal with it, you don't have the capacity to plan things out or deal with things in a logical manner. Like your ability to deal with it is impaired, and then you're exhausted. Like you have no ability to even do that much afterwards, and the recovery takes a while. So this happened 2 weeks ago. So last Saturday, I skipped the live stream because I was still exhausted from this. So I just went and I got a hotel. And I'm really thankful for that. The first hotel room that I got, there was someone who was blasting music like outside the door. So I was like, at first I was like, I'll just cope with it. But I was like, no, let's ask about it, right? I'm so glad I did. Like there's no way I could have handled that. Like this, I was so deeply sensitized by that point where and so like high strung that I couldn't even sleep the next night, because every little noise was just like, I was just like, ugh. It's almost like this, it set me off into this state where I felt extremely depressed, extremely anxious, and like that part of yourself that's able to like regulate like those anxious thoughts and those depressive thoughts, it was just like gone. So like extremely anxious, extremely depressed, not able to sleep, but like in the process of coming back to self-regulation. So the experience or symptoms was still really strong, even though I had gotten out of the environment that triggered it. And of course, if I just stayed in the same environment that triggered it, it would have taken a lot longer to recover from. Could have taken a couple weeks. Like, I might have had to take a whole week off work. So I was really anxious about being able to get myself back to being regulated so I could actually go back to work. And of course, what's happened in the past, I know, is that it did take weeks to recover from. And I thought, oh, like being around my family makes me depressed and anxious and extremely exhausted. But I didn't know this was a phenomenon that is common among people who are autistic. So I requested, when I had the initial issue with the hotel room, I went to the front desk and I requested help. And they actually moved me to a different room, so I was so thankful I was able to go to a quiet room. And I just stayed in this dark, quiet room for the rest of the day and decompressed. So it was upsetting because it felt like, yeah, my weekend was kind of ruined and I didn't get that much done. But because I addressed it right away and I went and got what I needed to give myself enough space to recover, the next day I went mountain biking, I went out in nature, and I really kind of was able to just purge all that anxiety. So when you have anxiety, you have, and stress, it gets stored and released in the body. So you actually need to physically clear that out. And of course, if you are exhausted and drained, how do you have the energy to do that? And if you stay in the same environment that continues to trigger you and cause this reaction, you're more drained and exhausted and exhausted and exhausted, and you can't do anything about it. And that's why it was so important to me to get out of the situation and address it right away so I could recover faster. So I spent the rest of that day in the hotel room, sobbing, crying, feeling extremely depressed, extremely anxious, extremely alone and isolated. Because this kind of experience, like, it's hard to communicate, it's hard to talk to people about it. In the fact that you can't get that understanding from most people, and you know you can't. You can't even begin to talk about it. It's very isolating in that sense. Yeah, so with that, of course, like the next day, I went mountain biking. And again, I decided, you know what, I am going to go to a different place that I hadn't been before, that seems like interesting, and I'm just going to take the whole day for myself. Not try to get anything else done, just take the day for myself and enjoy it. You know what showed up when I went mountain biking? A helicopter. I go out, I get there, I'm like, this is a beautiful place. I start mountain biking. There's a helicopter right above me, and it's so loud, and I'm biking and getting closer. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is way too loud. So I turn around, and then like, because I was still quite sensitive to sound, like after this like meltdown or shutdown happened, I was like extremely sensitive, and just like all the little sounds just like set me off, like making havoc in my brain, like and the more, because like I couldn't, like, you know how loud helicopters are, I couldn't like get away from it very fast because I was like biking, and so it was just like slowly like driving me crazy, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try and get as far away as I can from this helicopter. And I was like, this is awful. I came here to like be in nature and get away from noise, and like the one thing that could show up and just like make it difficult shows up. I did finally get far enough away from it. It just took some time. And the rest was fine because I stayed on the side of the area that was away from where they were using the helicopter. The helicopter's like just doing loops. They were doing like some kind of training with the helicopter. So I got some exercise, got some food, gave up on trying to cook. Just got some prepared food. Like, took the time and effort to like spend the money I needed to spend, and then slept better that night. It took a while. Like, my sleep kept getting better throughout the week, and like I think by the end of the week, I slept like 11 or 12 hours. I had this one night of sleep of 11 or 12 hours. Like, the anxiety finally came down enough, and I just like had this really long sleep. And I never sleep that long. I was able to go into work, able to show up at work, not able to do a ton that week. I was super exhausted still. But was able to have like the facade of being functioning. I was able to do at least that much, even though I wasn't able to be super productive. But the experience, like being in the hotel room alone, I was really thankful for it. But it was challenging and difficult. Not fun. It's really awful. And it made me realize, oh, you do struggle significantly. As a result of sensitivities to sound, social deficits, and this pressure to be this person or play this character that you've been using to survive. And this survival has been hard to the point of feeling a lot of depression, anxiety. Although I don't consciously notice the anxiety as much as the thoughts about not really enjoying my life and not really wanting to live, and despite how hard I've worked to create a good life, and despite the good things in my life that I have. And this does seem to be something that is consistent for people who are neurodivergent. There's the struggles with the executive function, basically the day-to-day tasks, the things that require a lot of effort and focus that don't for a lot of other people. And this level of detachment from life, that it's a struggle and it's challenging to the point where it's quite difficult. And whether that's like, it could be very consistent or not consistent at all. So you could have periods where it's very challenging and periods where it's not so bad. And when it's really challenging, the mind tends to forget about the better parts of it, right? But of course, when you have this really intense negative experiences that show up in your life that you realize are likely to happen again, and you have this anxiety about trying to manage your life, manage your environment to avoid it, because it's so dysregulating and so awful. At the very least, you can, being conscious and aware of what is happening, you're able to develop the awareness to recognize the signs earlier on, which can add to prevention. Unfortunately, you can't always control everything in your environment. And that's like the stressful aspect of it. For me, this experience really helped me connect the dots in my life. And it was deeply, deeply upsetting because it's the release of the denial of what I'm going through and the acknowledgement of the struggle. And it's almost like the denial can allow you to kind of keep going and keep faith and keep hope. But really acknowledging it really forces you to acknowledge that pain and struggle and really feel it. And mourn the parts of you, the you in your life that struggled so hard to fit this idea of what you thought you needed to be. So that really leads to the next aspect of it. Okay, so maybe you recognize you're neurodivergent, you recognize the struggles that you're having. What can happen is that you start going through this period where you're reprocessing and reintegrating your understanding and perceptions of the experiences in your life. You're really seeing how hard they were for you and how much of a struggle they were for you. You start to see, the clues and cues, the clues that were hidden, the cues that you missed, and really have a lot of compassion and love for yourself. And you can feel anger, frustration. You might feel hurt as you reprocess those experiences in your life, and you realize just how little support and understanding you had, and how it really wasn't even close to what you needed. And you survived despite it. You managed. So this can be really, it's like a relief, but it can also be really upsetting too. And this seems to be a common thread with people when they are diagnosed, or they connect the dots for themselves and they self-diagnose. They go through this period where they realize, I've been playing this character. And they realize just how deep that character goes, and just start to acknowledge and start to see their true self, and start to allow there be a space for their true self and who they are to be expressed. So I'll give an example. I was really interested in the universe guru. Her name's Mina Irfan. She talks a lot about being feminine and attracting a good guy and having a beautiful marriage and making money through your feminine essence or feminine power. So she's saying things about like you need to dress up and put effort into your appearance and be feminine, and she sells courses to make money, and she's like, yeah, and you can do it too. And I really bought into this. And now I'm looking back and realizing that I don't agree fully with what she's doing, or I can't do what she's doing because I find ethical issues with it. Charging a lot, like that extent of money for products and services where the value is, it's really like it's relative to or subjective. The value is subjective. I feel more now that she's selling to people who have money, and it's this kind of product or service that makes you feel good about yourself. And I see what she's doing as, selling things to rich people that they don't really need, but makes them feel good about themselves. That's what I see what she's doing as. Right? Like a lot of luxury products and goods, they're for the experience, right? And so she's providing an experience. Of course, those kind of groups, like the whole group that she's created around her, they kind of put her at the pedestal at the top, and she's seen as elevated, like more spiritually advanced. And I see an issue with that. So I bought some of her courses and I tried to play that out. And I was like, I'm going to create courses and sell them. But I have an issue with like that intangible aspect. And also in terms of feeling qualified. Like, is that actually going to benefit people? And is it potentially going to do more harm than good? Because when you have these like spiritual gurus and coaches, spiritual coaches, without like adequate knowledge and experience, how do you know what you're doing is effective? Like, what are you trying to do? Because like, if you want spiritual growth, that's something that's very intangible. How do you measure that? How do you know you're not just getting conned or scammed? The other aspect of the whole paradigm or concept of like being feminine, trying to attract a man, get married and have kids, is that really for you? So through this process, through doing this live stream series, I slowly started to disassemble this expectation. And I've been trying to not dissociate, but detach from this wanting to get married and have kids, and the frustration with that being a struggle, trying to make that happen. And of course, if you're neurodivergent, it's going to be like relationships are going to be that much more of a struggle to begin with. But that whole paradigm that's what people do and that's what makes you happy, I started to really truly feel that that wasn't true. That whole lock onto that paradigm of feeling like I need this to be happy, so if I don't have this affects my happiness, and therefore it affects my survival because I'm struggling with anxiety and depression and just trying to live, and I don't want to be depressed anymore, so that means I need to be happy. And it's you can see how this just becomes this whole thing that's really kind of neurotic. Not true to who you are, not true to who I am. Now, this can be something that's a genuine desire and aligns for you. But and here's the tricky part, it can feel like it's a genuine desire and truly aligns you at one point, and then later it can feel like it's not. And for me, that's what it feels like. It feels like it was, and now that's kind of disassembled, and it's not anymore. Now, a lot of this was stuck in anxiety about the future. I have to try to meet someone and make a relationship work so that I can have a family before I run out of time. So I'm not going to be depressed for the rest of my life. It was very anxious about the future. And now I'm not anxious about the future, I'm in the present. But it took for me to reframe through this new lens of understanding of the challenges I faced and who I am, and having my eyes open to it. Realizing this isn't something that I'm necessarily wired for. And if you're wired for something, that's saying you have an aptitude for it, it comes more easily to you. It's like the no duh. You can be playing along in this character with the no duh, oh yes, of course, we all do this. But you're playing the character and you're not conscious of that, and you've immersed yourself in the character to the extent that you don't realize this isn't truly who I am. And for me, it feels like that's kind of shattered. And that's part of the process. Realizing, I'm autistic, or I have ADHD, or I have both, or whatever it is you're struggling with, that explains what you've been struggling with for all these years. Realizing this doesn't come as naturally to me as it does to other people, so it doesn't make sense for me to expect myself to be able to do this easily, and I'm failing if I don't. Another thing that shows up for people who are neurodivergent is this lack of conformity to gender norms. You can have people who feel gender fluid, who don't feel like the gender stereotypes that they have to take on in this character really fit who they are, and they have to act to play this character, Well, I mean, sometimes the character does benefit you, right? Like playing the character of like a beautiful woman, and you can present externally as that. It has its benefits. You can get attention that way. But it may not be a character that's natural for you or truly expresses who you are. So like there's that aspect of gender identity, also identity in general. If I'm not this people pleaser, if I'm not this achiever who's basically achieving to survive, if I'm not this character that I've been playing to fit in, then who am I? And this can kind of, like you can have this grief where you're mourning who, like having this funeral for this character that you're like, oh, I don't have to play this character anymore. If you don't, sometimes maybe you do still have to play the character, or it's beneficial enough for you to play the character in certain situations. But also like grieving the pain of what you've been experiencing. You realize like what's been happening in your life. That's really hard. So, like if you're going through this process of becoming aware of who you truly are, and that may be someone who doesn't conform to norms very well, because you don't understand what the norms are and why you should do that. You don't have this drive to learn the norms. You can be going through your life and just not picking up on those cues. And then what comes along with that? If you are letting go of parts of yourself, your brain is rewiring itself and discarding things you don't need anymore. And what can come along with that is skill regression. So in the description, I'm going to post links to videos that are related to this topic that I think are really relevant. So I'm going to post a link about skill regression. And this was wild when I saw this. I was like, what? This is crazy. So your brain is like, I don't need these certain things anymore. I don't need to maintain this people-pleasing behavior because I'm like, oh, it's not necessary for me anymore. It served me at one point, I don't need it anymore. So you let that go, you let these different aspects go that you realize aren't you. And you realize, I don't need them in my life. Because maybe you've created a space for yourself where you can function that you don't need that anymore. So I've gotten a job where I slowly find myself saying things where the mask is slipping because I'm comfortable. Like I don't have to hide myself anymore. So I have this job that is helpful. Is an environment where I'm actually able to see it and be like, oh my gosh, and deconstruct this character that I've been being. And looking back over the past year, I've really struggled. And of course, I'm working in an environment where there are a lot of people who are neurodivergent. There's a higher proportion of people who are neurodivergent or neurodiverse than the rest of the population. My coworkers have triggered me so much. And I'm realizing now that's projection. All this part of myself that I don't like and I'm not accepting of myself, I've been projecting onto my coworkers and judging them. So I've gone through like so much judgment. And I have enough awareness. I know what projection is, and I'm like irritated and don't like them, and I know like, okay, like you're having a moment, Heather, and this is how it is today, and go and journal about it later, and you'll feel fine later, next week, next month. I don't take it out on other people, and no one even knows that I'm going through this, because I've developed this skill of like journaling about it, working through it on myself, and I recognize like I'm having these thoughts. Is that really true? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see once the emotion of it behind it subsides, whether it's true or not. You'll be able to think about it clearer, even if the it feels so strong right now. Like I'm able to recognize that, and I've developed that skill. So I've been in this environment that's allowed me to like slowly provide this window to be able to see myself clearly. And there's a lot of resistance to that. It took a long time. So I've been in this job for 2 years. It took a long time. I had all this judgment towards myself, towards others, and that's kind of the same thing. Like, you can't be accepting of yourself and not be accepting of others for the same thing. If you're judging others, you're judging yourself. And that's how it is, right? And that's like a mechanism of that projection. And this whole process is not fun, right? Because it's painful to release that judgment and to feel it, and I see how much, let's call it self-hatred. Self-hatred is a strong word, but lack of self-acceptance and self-love, because if you on the inside are not good enough and you're constantly pushing yourself unconsciously to play this character in this role, there's not a lot of room for self-love and self-acceptance. And this is a consequence of conforming yourself to this expectation to meet other people's expectations and needs, and sacrificing your true self and who you really are at the altar. And like, it can be so entrenched and so unconscious, and it can really only emerge once you have enough space for it to show up when you're safe. And that's why when you are in a safe space, you can actually feel dysregulated and uncomfortable and upset, because like this stuff is coming up and being released. And being in this job was a safe space where I often got triggered, and I've been working through this stuff, and it's weird because it's like, oh, I'm not trying to do it, it's just coming up, and then I have to deal with it as it comes, right? People talk about like spiritual work, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm not trying to do this spiritual work, this is really what's just happening. And I look back, and I really struggled with being attracted to this coworker and judging this coworker so much. Like, they're too socially awkward and clumsy, and what else did I criticize them for? Liking video games and having bad posture and not taking care of their health, like not eating healthy and not being super athletic. And a lot of these things they're not like symptoms of being neurodivergent, having autism or ADHD. I think autism, but I'm not sure. Like it's unless you like really dive into a specific person and get really granular about it, like it's hard to judge that, right, on a surface level, and I don't know this person that well. But a lot of their characteristics are characteristics that are almost like byproducts of being neurodivergent. So I was really attracted to this person because they exhibited characteristics that I have that are beautiful and attractive and wonderful and lovely. Unconsciously, right? Like, we're attracted to people and we don't really understand why. Aspects of myself that I had unconsciously judged as not being good enough, as not being part of the character or role that I needed to play, that were negative. Right, there's that lack of self-love within myself. So I was attracted to this person, but at the same judging them because I was judging myself. Yes, ultimately, you know, who I am is this beautiful, amazing person who is unconventional and different and has a different perspective. And if you're like me, you might have consciously or unconsciously judged and suppressed that because it didn't fit the mold of what you thought you needed to be. And that social pressure is so strong. It's so strong. So really unearthing it and having it come to light like that is really a deep, amazing thing. So I was basically judging this person for the characteristics that were like a consequence of them being neurodivergent. And upset at them for like making me attracted to them when they're not the kind of person that I'm supposed to be attracted to, because they don't fit the mold or idea of what in my mind is higher status. And so I'm judging them and in essence judging myself. They represent what I have been working so hard to not be. You see like the shame here, like the layers of shame, the layers of unconscious shame. Like you can look at someone and say like, whoa, the way you talk about yourself and the way you act like demonstrates this like deep level of self-hatred, and they'll be like, I love myself. like until you unearth it, it's unconscious, and so like you're not aware of it. Kudos to rest, right? Kudos to feeling safe, because you don't know what can heal and show up for you when you're finally safe enough to heal. When the survival instinct kicks in, like herds of animals will do this, they will have the survival instinct kick in, where their body will run on overdrive for them to survive, and they will like travel immense distances. The human body will endure so much in survival mode, and then when it's safe, it'll freak out. Like the body will when it no longer needs to survive, it'll go through the healing. So you can have this delayed effects. And this can happen years later. Decades later. So we've talked about burnout. We've talked about, depression. We've talked about meltdowns. We've talked about this whole character and issues with identity, and finally discovering the freedom to be yourself and being able to choose what does that look like for you. And maybe you don't need to invest huge amounts of energy into something that isn't for you. For example, if you are extremely sensitive to smells and noise, having children, that ideal family, might not be the dream that was sold to you. It might be the level of stress might not be even feasible for you to handle. And that's what I'm realizing, oh, some people it works for and well and they love it, but not for everyone. And there are reasons why. And if you don't have the support system, a lot of people don't even have the support system to have kids regardless, just because of the economy and just what's happening generally around us, the inflationary pressures, and just trying to survive just on your own is hard. You add kids onto that, yeah, it's hard. But if you have trouble just managing your own life, trying to have kids is it's a huge expectation to try and get what? To try and not be depressed. Well, if you're constantly burnt out even more, it's not it's this cycle where you're trying to fit in, thinking that's going to give you happiness and kind of alleviate the symptoms that you're experiencing, but then it just reinforces the symptoms you're experiencing because it's making it worse. It's beautiful when you're able to say no, I know that that's too much for me and that's not realistic for me, and you can release that pressure from yourself. There's other things I can do to make my life better, to create connection, that don't require me to do something that is actually going to make my experience of life worse. I'm not saying children in particular. I'm just saying, for example, you think I would feel so much better if I had a higher paying job, but maybe you get a more higher status, higher paying job and you feel worse because you've got so much more stress and you're constantly burnt out. So you might actually want a job where you're experiencing less stress and you'll be able to have more life balance. So we have these motivations to make choices in our lives that are kind of misdirected because we don't really understand why we want what we want, because we're constantly moving towards trying to help ourselves, but if we're doing this in an unconscious way and it's mixed together with what other people think we should do and this social pressure, we can be making decisions that are really not good for ourselves. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is really tying this back to spirituality. So, let's say you're odd. You're socially odd. You're kind of an outcast. You're struggling, anxiety, depression. You're struggling with life. And you seek out spirituality to help you. Now, is that seeking, is it going to help you and make you more able to cope with your life and more emotionally and mentally stable? Is it going to help you mask better? When I became Christian, I'd go to church and we'd be singing and God's going to take care of it. I had a reason to take all that anxiety, all those worries, some of which were very much genuine concerns, and toss them out and find some peace. I would go to church because I felt peace. Because you don't have to worry about it. God will take care of it. So, and I was able to deal with very, very stressful situations. Because that's how I was coping. And if you say, well, the theology doesn't make sense, well, the theology is not what's driving this decision to engage in spirituality in this way, for me at this time in my life. So there came a point where I realized this is not helping. I need to actually take action to make my life better. So I really disengaged and really focused on that. Because it was like putting a Band-Aid on this wound that was not healing, it's festering. And you leave it, over time, it's going to get worse. I needed to deal with the financial issues that affected my future and being able to be independent. Being able to have the money to be able to, for example, what I did, be able to afford to go get a hotel room so I could decompress from the meltdown. So spirituality can help. It can be a Band-Aid. It can also exacerbate existing mental health, emotional health issues. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because there's a line between using spirituality to help yourself self-regulate, to find connection with other people, as a form of meditation, which is self-regulation, using the positive aspects. And then there you can cross the line where you can go to the extent where it starts to feed into spiritual psychosis on the extreme, increased stress and anxiety, buying into really damaging beliefs. So things that cause you to make decisions and behavior that is actually going to cause more issues in the future than solving present issues. So it's you initially find some peace and regulation and connection, but maybe you go a little too far, and now you're, for example, you're giving away your life savings and you're not creating anything for yourself. Not creating a future for yourself because you have given up your responsibility to individuate, to submerge yourself into the group whole. And of course, like we talked about the creation templates in there with the spiral dynamics model, like that is like an aspect of the stage where you're learning to be a part of a group. But individuating and becoming your own person is really important. You do have to create a future for yourself so that you're not continually dependent on other people. And if you're dependent and you have sensory issues, you have these various other issues, other people may not be willing to or be able to accommodate you. So essentially you have to accommodate yourself. But you have to be in a position where you can. So you can't be like relying on other people to take care of you. Because you can get stuck in this cycle, like maybe like living with your parents, and then your parents are your family, and they're triggering these meltdowns consistently. And so I've realized that I can't be around my family during holidays anymore. It's been hell. I like leading up to Christmas, the whole month, like I would have intense anxiety leading up to Christmas. I would just dread Christmas because it was so awful for me, because I would have these meltdowns consistently and predictably. But you can say like you can say like it feels almost like being gaslighted, where no one else is recognizing the experience that you're having. Like you're having this awful experience and it feels like no one else gives a shit. They just want you to plug into their fantasy of this perfect family Christmas, and you have to play this agonizing role to fit their fantasy, and it's hell for you, and it's exhausting and awful for you, and ultimately destructive for you, because you're putting all this energy into something that is draining you of the energy that you could be using to help yourself and build your own life and build what you need for yourself. It's not actually helping them that much, and it's just can just like be destroying what you can be making for yourself. That's my experience of it. But it took a really long time for me to realize, you know what, I have to set really strong boundaries around this. And I have done this to a degree, but I didn't realize that I needed to, like, how far I needed to take it. And now I realize, like, oh, okay. Now I see. And the accommodations that I did make for myself in the past, where, you know, there's a family gathering, I'm like, I'm out, I'm leaving, I can be present for a little bit, but after that, I can't handle more than that. It made such a difference. Huge, huge, huge difference to my physical, mental, emotional health. So, back to spirituality. Right now, I am struggling with this challenge of... So I've described how there's this identity issue where you are releasing this character that you've been playing, and you're trying to figure out who you are. It's the same for your beliefs. Like, what do you believe? And this has been really hard because I've done this channel, I've talked about spiritual concepts. This concept of who I am is kind of disintegrating. And I'm discovering, you know what? Some of that is not me. But here's the thing, how much of that is not me? And what do I still believe and what do I not believe? I feel super disconnected to like all the spiritual discussion that I've done on this channel, that I've connected to people on this channel over, and I really love that connection. Oh. But I'm like, of me in those videos and on those live streams, how much of that is actually me? And do I continue this or not? So I know, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to stop with this channel, but it's hard because I'm in that in-between where it feels like, is anything I talked about true? And I know, like, this is the part of the deconstruction. When you deconstruct it, the whole building it's in blocks. And eventually you reconstruct it. You still have those blocks, but you've got like this physical rewiring of neurons in the brain. I didn't really go into the skill regression too much, but I'll try and stay focused on this current subject right now, where like I'm feeling that deconstruction process, and it's very disorienting. And it's like, I know it's a process. I know I'm not going to feel this way forever. I know I'm eventually going to find my ground again. But do I continue with this? And the answer is, why don't you wait and see next week how you feel about it? When you're emotional, how you wait till tomorrow? How do you feel about it tomorrow? How are you going to feel about it next week? Like, you don't have to like make the decision right away. And when you're feeling like really emotional, it's better to just realize, you know what, maybe I could give myself some more time and see how I feel about it later. And I know that. But still, as you experience it, you're in it, and you're not experiencing that outside perspective or that 20/20 vision. So it's hard, right? So I've been struggling with what is true, like what spiritual beliefs are true. What do I want to hold on to? And I'm looking back and I'm thinking some of it I'm not holding on to. Like, for example, like the Universe Guru, I'm not watching those videos anymore that she posts. There's some other channels that I've posted videos as links to live streams before that I don't watch their videos anymore. I'm not interested. And I've thought, like, it almost feels like I have this really intense grounding that's happening where I'm deeply connected to the present, to the now, what's happening, what I'm experiencing now. And of course, what I'm experiencing now is very physical. And I feel a lot of the spirituality is wrapped up in all these concepts about spirituality, and none of that feels real to me right now. Now, and is any of that real? I don't know. I'm in that space where I don't know. But if I think about it, the concepts themselves don't have any tangibility beyond, or truth, essential truth beyond just being concepts. What's really true is what's here now. Like the essence of truth is just what's here now. Everything beyond that, within like the thought structures and paradigms, is not the truth itself. It just points to the truth. And so maybe that's what I'm experiencing. Just a deep immersion in the now and in the present, and releasing like all these paradigms, because that's what they are. A lot of these spiritual paradigms are paradigms. They can be fun and exciting to explore and investigate, But at the end of the day, all that exists is just what is, in whatever form you're experiencing. You have memory. You can imagine the future. But none of that really exists because it's not here right now in the present. So if I was going to explain what I'm experiencing, that might be it. But it feels very disorienting and different, and I think it might normalize out, or it might pass, and I might be sorting through, like, what do I want to hold on to and what do I want to let go? And that's okay. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk about. Like, there's the skill regression. I'm not sure if I mentioned too much about it. But like, sometimes as you're going through this process of like reorganizing your self-concept and letting go of things, your brain is reorganizing too, and things are wired together. So as you're letting go of this kind of masking and those kind of masking skills and this kind of character and that you're playing to be able to fit in, sometimes some of the skills that are wired with that start to seem like you get worse at them. So that's the skill regression. And so that's a consequence of the brain rewiring itself, and I'll link the video that talks about that below. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so at first I thought, like, because I didn't make notes for today and I usually make a presentation, I'm like, am I really going to be able to talk for usually like that, at least an hour? I usually go for at least an hour, and it turns out I could talk for that long. I didn't need to worry about not being prepared as I imagined being prepared. I had planned to do a live stream talking about dopamine, serotonin, because I thought, like, you know, the connection between dopamine and ADHD is interesting, so that would be interesting to explore. And also, like, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, how those affect us generally is quite interesting. And then I also wanted to talk about spiritual psychosis as well. So I had planned to do 2 more live streams, but I will be away for the next 2 weekends, and we'll see how much time I'll need to recover once I get back from that. So I will be posting in the community tab, and I think I will also try to make notes about when I plan to do a live stream in my profile on my channel. Because before I said, oh, I'm going to do a live stream on Saturdays at 5 p.m. PST, and then I thought, well, that's probably going to change over the summer. So I might just update that as it changes. If people go to there to find information, I don't know if anyone does, but just so it's there. So if you're watching, thank you for joining. It was a more emotional live this week. Of course, like, the topic was more emotional, and I will make sure to post some relevant links in the description when I get a chance. Yeah, so I've covered, like, different aspects of this topic, like, throughout the series, and I try to cover something slightly different each week. So you can go back. There's part 1 to part 5. Like, today was the part 5. Yeah, so again, thank you for joining me, and I hope maybe you got something out of it.